Washington, President Trump and his advisors are resisting calls from congressional Democrats and a growing number of governors to use a federal law to mobilize industry to provide badly needed resources to help halt the spread of the coronavirus, days after the president said he would consider using that authority.
Mr. Trump has given conflicting signals about the Defense Production Act since he first said on Wednesday that he was prepared to invoke the law, which was passed by Congress in 1950 at the outset of the Korean War and grants presidents extraordinary powers to force American industries ensure the availability of critical equipment.
Later that day, he seemed to backtrack, writing on Twitter that the act would be used only in a worst-case scenario. But then at a news briefing on Friday afternoon, Mr. Trump claimed that he had used it to spur the production of millions of masks. He also confirmed that he had discussed using the act during a call in the morning with Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, the Democratic leader, that he said was extremely good.
At the same time, the president suggested that private companies, including General Motors, had volunteered to produce supplies.
We are literally being besieged in a beautiful way by companies that want to do the work and help our country, Mr. Trump said. We have not had a problem with that at all.
Some of the president's advisors have privately said they share conservatives' long-standing opposition of government intervention and oppose using the law, and the president again suggested his own ambivalence toward using it.
When we need something, we'll order something, Mr. Trump said of the act. As you know, 2 days ago, I invoked the act. It is a big step. I am not sure if it is done before. When we need something, we'll use it.
The White House did not immediately respond to inquiries asking for examples of companies or industries that have been compelled under the Defense Production Act to spur production, as Mr. Trump claimed. And the president did not say if masks and supplies have actually been delivered to the workers who need them.
During the briefing, Mr. Trump grew increasingly confrontational with reporters as they pressed him on the details of the act, and he snapped at a reporter for NBC News who asked him to detail his message to Americans who were shaken by their lives being upended.
It is a bad signal that you are putting out to the American people, the president said to the reporter. You want to get back to reporting instead of sensationalism. Let's see if it works. I happen to feel good about it. Who knows? I have been right a lot. Let's see what happens. As
he continued sparring with reporters, Mr. Trump appeared to toggle back and forth on whether or not he had actually used the act to force companies to jump-start production on supplies. Without clear guidance from the administration, frustrated Democrats said that the president had shirked his responsibility to act during a national crisis.
We're talking about a president who is basically doing what Herbert Hoover did at the beginning of the Depression and minimizing the danger and refusing to use available federal action, Mayor Bill de Blasio of New York said Friday in an interview with the radio station WNYC. And people are going to die, and they shouldn't, they don't have to, if we could get the support that we're asking for.
Republicans have not been openly critical, but some governors have been explicit in describing their difficulties in depending on the private sector for medical supplies.
In a call held on Thursday with Mr. Trump at the Federal Emergency Management Agency headquarters, a group of governors stressed to him that they were struggling to address the staggering demand for equipment and supplies.
At one point, Gov. Kristi Noem, Republican of South Dakota, grew frustrated as she expressed to the president and members of the coronavirus task force that state officials had been working unsuccessfully with private suppliers.
I need to understand how you're triaging supplies, Ms. Noem said. We, for 2 weeks, were requesting reagents for our public health lab from CDC, who pushed us to private suppliers who kept canceling orders on us. And we kept making requests, placing orders.
She added, I don't want to be less of a priority because we're a smaller state or less populated.
Mr. Trump promised her that would never happen before Ms. Noem's telephone line was disconnected.
When it was originally passed, the Defense Production Act granted President Harry S. Truman the power to spur the production of aluminum, titanium and other needed materials during wartime. Since then, it has been used for both the prevention of terrorism and to prepare for natural disasters.
The act would give the Trump administration the authority to override companies' existing contracts and to direct supplies to hotspots like New York City or Seattle. It could also help mobilize funds for retooling factories, refitting pharmacy drive-thrus into testing sites and ramping up production of an eventual vaccine.
Business leaders have said invoking it is not necessary.
John Murphy, the senior vice president for international policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, said that corporate executives were already working hand in glove with the government on production challenges.
American companies will do whatever it takes to support our country's response to the pandemic and shore up the economy, he said. The Defense Production Act was designed for defense industry products with a single supplier, often with purely domestic production chains, and invoking it may do more harm than good in sectors such as pharmaceuticals and medical equipment.
Companies that manufacture face masks, medical wipes and other supplies say they are already operating around the clock to meet elevated demand. Some factories that make similar products, like surgical gowns, diapers and incontinence products, have already switched over to manufacture the face masks or other protective gear that healthcare workers need.
But people familiar with the administration's actions say it is still trying to figure out how industry supply chains operate, which companies could produce additional products and what kinds of subsidies it may need to offer.
And without the Defense Production Act, the government will lack the ability to channel these supplies to areas that need it most, or to persuade companies to act quickly and without regard for their profits.
As reported cases of the virus in the United States have soared, Mr. Trump, who is known to recruit input from a variety of outside advisors, has been getting conflicting advice. And an influx of private sector voices with direct access to the president and his top advisors, notably his son-in-law and advisor, Jared Kushner, has resulted in a chaotic process.
The president's advisors say they see the role of the federal government as a facilitator, as opposed to the chief producer or a national governor. They have tried to encourage states to get by with what they can, suggesting there will be support from the federal government but that this should not be the first option. And they have hoped that private companies will be spurred by the president's statements to increase production.
We're actually encouraged that the partnership with the private sector can meeting many of these needs, said Mark Short, Vice President Mike Pence's chief of staff, on Friday morning in a discussion with reporters.
Katie Rogers and Anna Swanson reported from Washington, and Maggie Haberman from New York. Michael Gold contributed reporting from New York.